Morning, dear children, come back to online classes. Today we are going to see the remaining chapter of the history, third chapter. The first topic today is crops for Europe. Children, in the previous class we have already seen that how the Britishers used to get the revenue from the countryside. So here the British also realized that the countryside could not only yield revenue, it could also grow the crops that Europe required. By the late 18th century, the company was trying its best to expand the cultivation of opium and indigo. So, opium is a plant based naturally occurring narcotic that is derived from the sap of unripe bulbs of the poppy plant. And indigo, in the century and a half that followed, the British forced cultivators in various parts of India to produce other crops such as jute in Bengal, tea in Assam, sugarcane in the United Provinces, now Uttar Pradesh, wheat in Punjab, cotton in Maharashtra and Punjab, rice in Madras. So, the British used a variety of methods to expand the cultivation of crops that they needed. So, here you can see the two images of cotton prints. First is figure number 5. It shows a kalamkari print created by weavers of Andhra Pradesh in India. And the next is figure number 6, the floral cotton prints designed and produced by William Morris, a famous poet and artist of 19th century Britain. There is one thing common in the both the prints is that they use rich blue color, commonly called indigo. So the blue that you see in these two prints was produced from a plant called indigo. It is likely that the blue dye used in the Morris prints in 19th century Britain was manufactured from indigo plants which are cultivated in India. So India was a big supplier of indigo in the world at that time. Next is why the demand for Indian indigo. Let us see. The indigo plant grows primarily in the tropics. By the 13th century, Indian indigo was being used by cloth manufacturers in Italy, France, and Britain to dye cloth. So, however, only small amount of Indian indigo reached the European market and its price was very high. European cloth manufacturer therefore had to depend on another plant called woad to make violet and blue dyes. Being a plant of the temperate zone, woad was more easily available in Europe. It was grown in northern Italy, southern France, and in parts of Germany and Britain. Worried by the competition for the indigo, wood producers in Europe pressurized their government to ban the import of indigo. So, cloth dyers, however, preferred indigo as a dye. Indigo produced a rich blue color, but the dye from wood was pale and dull. By the 17th century, European cloth producers persuaded their governments to relax the ban on indigo import. And cultivating indigo in Saint Domingo in the Caribbean islands, the Portuguese in Brazil, the English in Jamaica, and the Spanish in Venezuela. Indigo plantations also came up in many parts of North America. Plantations here means a large farm operated by a planter employing various forms of labor. Plantations are also associated with the production of coffee, sugarcane, tobacco, tea, and cotton. By the end of the 18th century, the demand for Indian indigo grew further. Britain began to industrialize and its cotton production expanded, creating enormous new demand for cloth dyes. While the demand for indigo increased, its existing supplies from the West Indies and America collapsed for a variety of reasons. So, between 1783 and 1789, the production of indigo in the world fell by half. Cloth dyers in Britain now desperately looked for new sources of indigo supply. So, now the British turns to India. Britain turns to India. Faced with the rising demand for indigo in Europe, the company in India looked for ways to expand the area under indigo cultivation. Now the British turned to India for the indigo. From the last decades of the 18th century, indigo cultivation in Bengal expanded rapidly and Bengal indigo came to dominate the world market. In 1788, only about 30% of the indigo imported into Britain was from India, but by 1810 the proportion had gone up to 95%. As the indigo trade grew, commercial agents and officials of the company began investing in indigo production. Now their company officials left their jobs to look after their indigo business as they are getting lot of profit from this. So attracted by the prospect of high profits, numerous Scotsmen and Englishmen came to India and became planters. Those who had no money, they used to get loans from the company and the banks that were coming up at that time. How was indigo cultivated then? There were two main systems of indigo cultivation. They are niche and royalty. Within the system of niche cultivation, the planters produced indigo in lands that he directly controlled. He either bought the land or rented it from other zamindars and produced indigo by directly employing hired laborers. Problem with niche cultivation that that is indigo could be cultivated only on fertile lands and they were already densely populated. Planters needed large areas in compact blocks to cultivate indigo in plantations. So from where do they can get such kind of land from? So they attempted to lease in the land around the indigo factory and evict the peasants from the area. But this always led to conflicts and tension. Nor was labor was not easy to mobilize. A large plantation required a vast number of hands to operate, and labor was needed precisely at a time when peasants were usually busy with their rice cultivation. So now about niche cultivation on a niche cultivation on a large scale also required many plows and bullocks. So here one biga of indigo cultivation required 2 plows. This meant that a planters with 1,000 bigas would need 2,000 plows. Investing on purchase and maintenance of plow was a big problem. Nor could supplies be easily got from the peasants since their plows and bullocks were busy on their rice fields. Again, exactly at the time that the indigo planter needed them. Now here biga means a unit of measurement of land. Before British rule, the size of this area varied in Bengal. The British standardized it to about 1/3 of an acre. So till the late 19th century, planters were therefore reluctant to expand the area under niche cultivation. Less than 25% of the land producing indigo was under this system. The rest was under an alternative mode of cultivation, the royalty on the land of ryots. Under the royalty system, the planters forced the ryots to sign a contract. an agreement. At times they pressurized the village headman to sign the contract on behalf of the Riots. Those who signed this contract, they got cash advances from the planters at low rates of interest to produce indigo. But the loan committed the right to cultivating indigo on at least 25% of the area under his holding. The planters provided the seeds and the drill, while the cultivators prepared the soil, sowed the seed, and looked after the crop. Then, when the crops was delivered to the planters after the harvest, a new loan was given to the Royat, and the cycle started all over again. Patients who were initially tempted by the loans soon realized how harsh the system was. The price they got for the indigo they produced was very low, and the cycle of loan never ended. There were other problems too. The planters usually insisted that indigo be cultivated on the best soils, in which peasants preferred to cultivate rice. Indigo, moreover, had deep roots and it exhausted the soil rapidly. After an indigo harvest, the land could not be sown with rice. So, in this paragraph, we'll see why were Riots reluctant to grow indigo. So, following were the reasons for the Riots were reluctant to grow indigo. That is, they were given loans to grow crops, but when crops were harvested, they were compelled to sell them at lower prices. So, with this price, they were unable to pay loans, thus, fell into a cycle of indebtedness. Second thing is that they had to grow indigo on a fixed parts of their land. So for other crops they had small pieces of land left. Hence their food grains needs were not met with. And also the cultivation of indigo required the most fertile land. The lands left were not suitable for growing other crops. Next is indigo cultivation required extra labor and time. So they did not have enough time and labor spared for food crops. The indigo cultivators in Bengal were given loans, but for they had to grow indigo on at least 25% of the area under their holdings. The planters provided only seed and drill. The rest of the works till the crop was harvested was to be done by the Riots. The price the Riots got for their indigo was very low. They had to take loans to repay their previous loans. Thus, the cycle of loan was never ending. The planters usually insisted that indigo should be cultivated on the best soils, in which peasants prefer to cultivate rice. The indigo crops exhausted the soil rapidly. After an indigo harvest, the land could not be sown with rice. These were certain circumstances which lead to the eventual collapse of indigo production in Bengal. Blue Rebellion and after. In March 1859, thousands of riots in Bengal refused to grow indigo. Riots here means peasants who worked on farms. As the rebellion spread, riots refused to pay rents to the planters and attacked indigo factories armed with swords and spears, bows and arrows. Women turned up to fight with pots, pans, and kitchen implements. Those who worked for the planters were socially boycotted, and the gumastas here means the person who worked as agents of the indigo planters, who came to collect rent, were beaten up. Droids swore they would no longer take advances to sow indigo nor be bullied by the planters' latials. Latials, the lathi wielding strongmen maintained by the planters. Why did the indigo patients decide that they would no longer remain silent? What gave them the power to rebel? Clearly, the indigo system was intensely oppressive. But those who were oppressed do not always rise up in rebellion. They do so only at times. Oppressed here means subject to harsh treatment. In 1859, the Indigo Riots felt that they had the support of the local zamindars and village headmen in their rebellion against the planters. In many villages, headmen who had been forced to sign indigo contracts mobilized the indigo peasants and fought pitched battles with the Latials. In other places, even the zamindars went around villages urging the riots to resist the planters. These zamindars were unhappy with the increasing power of the planters and angry at being forced by the planters to give them land on long leases. The